So thanks for coming, and thanks for all staying. I promise I will make it worth your while. I have some fossils, and actually, I'm going to move this over here so I can fossils on the table. So, as Pierre said, I'm a geologist teaching at an art school, which is, I didn't know that's where I wanted to be, but it's pretty much my dream job. So I teach a class at CCA called Bad Science at the Movies. And this is essentially a class that uses bad Hollywood disaster movies as a framework for introducing geology to college students. You could teach this class about any branch of science. I'm a geologist, so that's the way I teach it. We start in outer space. I'm really glad I'm not talking about those movies today. And so we watch things like Deep Impact and Armageddon, really based in astronomy that happens in some sort of other world because they don't follow any sorts of rules. Then we move from outer space back to Earth, where we watch things like The Core, which actually was the inspiration for this class, Journey to the Center of the Earth, of which there are many versions, all of them pretty appalling. We then spend a fair bit of time on volcano movies, like Volcano, Dante's Peak, and then we move on to earthquake movies, going back to the classic of the 1970s, Earthquake, and then to more modern favorites like 10.5, which I hope none of you have seen, because it's terrible. And then we move into some more recent movies. The 90s were really a sort of heyday of disaster movies. We watch things like The Day After Tomorrow. And there's even been some new movies that have come out, like Magma, Volcanic Disaster. Of course, magma is actually what's in the ground, lava is what comes out of volcanoes, so even the title's bad. Pompeii, and that's another bad one. And then 2012, which is pretty much like if all of these movies had a party and had a love child, it would be 2012. So this is a picture of me teaching, so it's a little bit like herding lions. And I teach at an art school, which is an unusual place to be a scientist, but it's actually a place where I found a really good home. I think because even though some art students come in with this idea of, I'm not a math person, or I'm not a science person, and I actually should say that these two students were both decidedly math and science people, so they're in the picture. And so this class has been a way for me to reach students that perhaps wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as being excited to be in a science class. I've had film majors who can bring a different perspective. I'm surprisingly not a film buff. You name a movie, I haven't seen it, unless it's a bad Hollywood disaster movie. So I am a geologist by training, so the inspiration for this class came when I was in graduate school at the University of Oregon. Another interesting connection here tonight. This is a picture of me in the field collecting plant fossils. This is in Antarctica about 10 years ago or so. And while I was in graduate school, this cinematic masterpiece came out, The Core, and it's going to be a really good movie when one of the reviews says it's 100% exciting. 100%. Statistically significant excitement awaits you. And so this movie, for those of you who haven't seen it, it involves the core stopping, which luckily probably can't happen. And because of that, the Earth's magnetic field fails. Okay, it does flip-flop from time to time. Probably don't need to worry about it. This class is actually great for helping students realize they don't need to worry about a lot of these things. And so the movie, they send their terranauts, as they call them, in this magical Earth ship, and they're going to bring some nuclear weapons because that's how you solve problems. Disaster movies, what could possibly go wrong? So this movie was sort of the inspiration for this class because I watched it with my friends in grad school, and it was funny, and it was silly, and those are both things that really characterize my teaching. If you can't be funny and silly, that's part of why I love science. So this movie sort of started this whole project in this class. And so then as I started developing this as a full-length semester course, which I just thought I was getting away with murder, just getting to teach this, I went back and sort of did a survey of all movies that have anything even tangentially related to science. And so you can go back, into the 50s and 60s and find examples of bad Hollywood disaster movies. And this is one of my favorites, Krakatoa East of Java, which is about it's loosely about the 1882 eruption of Krakatoa. Krakatoa East of Java, the problem is actually in its title, Krakatoa is west of Java. They had maps in the 60s, I'm pretty sure. So geography is a problem that is fairly common in all of these films, basic fact checking. But that's sort of what is, oftentimes it's literally on the cover of the movie, the first problem. And then we have more recent movies like Sharknado, starring the great actors Tara Reid and Ian Ziering. And this movie, enough said. So Sharknado came out, and I, of course, got emails from lots of former students who were very excited. It's pretty hilarious if you haven't seen it. They've now come out with like Sharknado 2. And so, but the interesting thing about these movies, and this is I think why I keep being just really enthralled by this topic, is that there's often what I've taken to calling the kernel of truth in these films. And so I thought, could Sharknado really happen? Good news is no. You don't need to worry about angry shark tornadoes coming at you in Los Angeles. But I was able to find an example in 1877 in the New York Times. There was a very small report about a shower of alligators. That apparently a group of very, very small baby alligators had been picked up in South Carolina in some sort of water spout tornado event, and had dropped them in the region where they were found. So maybe not a Sharknado blowing across Los Angeles, but apparently it is possible to pick up very small animals sometimes. Yeah, Crocnado, basically. And so a lot of times in looking at these films, I think it's given me a better perspective on science, because you often do have to, you give the movie that little kernel of truth, or you give the movie whatever sort of premise that they have. Okay, that can happen. Can the rest of the movie be real? Usually, no. But so, for example, this movie, Volcano, which involves a volcano erupting out of the La Brea tar pits on Wilshire Boulevard, that can't, no, it's not going to happen. This is also interesting because it's one of the rare movies where it has an art joke in it. And my students are artists. I always point it out, and I get really excited about it, and they're like too cool for it. But it destroys, this volcano not only erupts out of the La Brea tar pits, it also destroys the LA County Museum of Art, which is right next door. So this movie is quite fanciful. It came out the same year as Dante's Peak, which actually had better science. It did not as well in the box office. That tends to be what happens. And this has a great scene in it that really, I think, speaks to how science and scientists are presented in Hollywood disaster movies. And the three characters here are Amy, the lady scientist. She's definitely always being a lady in this movie. She falls in love with Rourke in a May-December relationship. He's the head of FEMA, gruff but lovable. There's always time to fall in love when there's a disaster happening. And then Rachel, who is Amy's sidekick, she dies. Sorry if I've spoiled the movie for you.
What's magma? Love.
Yes, so they have this very clever, Amy's meant to be a volcanologist, and she is describing to Rourke the possibility that there is basically a volcano under Los Angeles. And Rourke says, lava right here in LA, it's one of the possibilities. We have a history of that here in the downtown area. And then Rachel, oh God, fixed it. Rachel, in one of her few lines where she's not just being the trusty sidekick, says, Pericotine, 1943, a Mexican farmer sees smoke coming out from the middle of his cornfield. A week later, there's a volcano 1,000 feet high. There's no history of anything until it happens. Then there is. Okay, so these movies simultaneously trivialize science and mystify it. They make it this thing that is sort of smoke and mirrors, and yet so simple. and yet still unknowable. And the thing about this example of Precutine is that Precutine, yes, was a surprise. This is a cinder cone that formed in Mexico. A farmer one day noticed there was a crack in his field and rocks were coming out of it, smoke. That was surprising. What's not surprising is that Precutine is actually a part of this very large chain of volcanoes in Mexico, which occur because the Cocos Plate's being subducted under Mexico there. So, yes, it was surprising for the farmer. No, it was not surprising in terms of the scientific background of the area. And yes, Precutine erupted for about 9 years. It was 5 stories tall by the end of the first week. It would have been very exciting to be there. So we spent a lot of time in the class talking not only about the films, but also giving students a really good background in the topic that we're covering. So we talk about how volcanoes form, about why we get volcanoes here, why we don't have active volcanoes in San Francisco. And then, I know, I'm really sorry. So it always, of course, students say, well, do you like anything? So I'm a very annoying person to watch movies with because I talk through the whole thing. But students always ask, is there any movie that you actually like? And Jurassic Park is probably one of my favorite movies. It actually so it came out in 1993. They just had the 20-year re-release as 3D, best movie-going experience of my life. There are some serious problems with Jurassic Park, so that's what I thought I'd finish with today. I will say this movie has the best depiction of a scientist in it out of all the films we watch in the class, and that's when the paleontologists see the dinosaurs for the first time. And I've done a lot of my research is in paleontology, and the idea that you would suddenly be seeing these creatures that you'd only ever studied and only ever imagined, and they get it so right, and they're falling over themselves. And the crazy part about that scene is that the actors were actually, there were no dinosaurs there. They were just acting against a backdrop. The dinosaurs were added in later. So that scene, it gives me goosebumps every time. The rest of the movie is pretty bad. And one of the biggest problems, again, just going back to our Krakatoa east of Java, is that the title of Jurassic Park is problematic. Most of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are from the Cretaceous period. That's the Jurassic, this is the Cretaceous. So probably right now a lot of you are thinking, but Jurassic Park sounds cooler. You don't even know. You would have thought Cretaceous Park sounded cool too. You would. That's just my thing. Of course, culturally we have some problems with even just identifying what dinosaurs are. This is a set of cookie cutters that I got from Williams-Sonoma. Has a pterosaur. Dinosaurs only lived on land. It also has a woolly mammoth. That's definitely not a dinosaur. There have been some interesting things running around on Facebook recently about, are dinosaurs even real? Or are they just were they just plotted here? Yeah, it's a little bit weird. So what I thought we'd just talk about in the time we have left is this idea of cloning extinct animals. Is that really a possibility? And so when we talk about this in my class, I do bring in some fossils, and so we have this. We have tons of dinosaur bones. So this is a dinosaur bone. It's a vertebrae from probably a sauropod, and so we have lots of dinosaur bones. Unfortunately, bone is not a great way to preserve DNA. Also, when you're a couple 100 million years old, or even just 70 or 80 million years old, DNA is far too fragile. I mean, CSI and all of those crime shows have given us that idea that DNA is forever and that it's easy to find it, but there's just simply no DNA preserved in the dinosaur bones. And the one on the screen is a T-Rex.
They got insects in amber.
Right? Okay, so is that a thing? Okay, so insects in amber. Thank you. I'll give you your $20 after. So when we think about Jurassic Park, and I'm sure you've all seen it, or you can go, if you just Google Mr. DNA, you can pull up the scene on YouTube. So amber is a really easy way, well, it's not easy to become a fossil in general, but we do have lots of examples of insects. So these are some ants, and this is, I think, a mayfly, and even some vertebrates. So that's a small lizard, and that piece of amber sold for something like $30,000 or $40,000, which is crazy. So these are all examples of insects, vertebrates. We sometimes get birds, things like feathers, seeds, etc. Lots of things preserved in amber. And so the way that amber forms, okay, and I just work at an art school. I didn't go to art school, so that's a tree. Tree. And some trees produce a substance called resin, which if you've played the violin, you're familiar with because it's the same as rosin. So this is a substance that certain trees produce when they've been injured. So, a bird comes and nibbles on the tree, a branch falls off. The tree then produces this resin. It's very sticky. It acts similarly to how your scabs work. When you have a scab, it's basically your body creating this substance that makes a nice crusty little scab to protect you from anything that wants to get in. And just like the scabs that you have, things get stuck in it. Like if you wear sweatpants after you skin your knee, you get all that fluff. So trees don't wear sweatpants, but they do get things caught in their tree scabs. And so things like pollen and various bits from the plant, and then occasionally these insects. So just like your scabs, I've now said scabs a few too many times, these scabs will fall off and they accumulate under the tree, and over a period of several million years, they will transform from being resin to a substance called copal, and then eventually to amber. And the way you can tell the difference between copal and amber is that copal will sink, and amber will float. So it's a natural hydrocarbon, so it's like nature's plastic. If you burn it, it will smell like a Christmas tree, unless it's fake, and then it will smell like burning plastic. So most of the amber in Jurassic Park is fake. You can usually see the seams. Why are you sinking? Science. So I probably didn't make the water. You make salt water. I think I didn't make it salty enough, but oh well. So the process by which this happens is one of devolatilization. Devolatilization. And what this basically means is that all the volatiles in that resin are driven off. Okay, so that's essentially, it's a fancy way of saying drying. Okay, so in the movie Jurassic Park, we're expected to believe that we had dinosaurs. I mean, we do, they're a thing, they existed. Dinosaurs, and that mosquitoes then came, that's enough legs, and had a blood meal, delicious, fed on the dinosaur, get the blood, get trapped in the resin, and then we come in with our magic dinosaur DNA sequencing and make a dinosaur. There's a lot of other problems. They use frog DNA, which is problematic. But the big issue here is if you look at insects that are preserved in amber, there's nothing inside of them. They're hollow. Okay? And that's because this is a drying reaction. So even if there was any blood, which I'm going to say is there probably wasn't any blood to begin with, it would be gone. So this is not a good way to clone extinct animals. The other issue is that, yes, we did have mosquitoes during the Mesozoic. So this is the mosquito family here. We do have it going back to, they coincided with dinosaurs. Problem is that the mosquitoes they show in Jurassic Park are actually male mosquitoes. No, I don't know how to tell them apart. Mosquito experts have figured that out. And they basically, the male mosquitoes are not the ones that eat the blood meals. The other issue is that if we actually look at the fossil record, this is the oldest, quote unquote, modern mosquito, and it's actually only about 76 to 79 million years old, so only overlapping with the dinosaurs by about 10 million years, which for a geologist is not very long. And you can see this is what it looks like. Looks hairy and mosquito-y. But the cool thing is that science is catching up. So Jurassic Park was fantasy when it came out in 1993. Scientists are now working, they've sequenced the woolly mammoth genome, and I suspect that certainly within my career, people probably will have cloned the woolly mammoth. There are a whole heap of ethical questions. It's actually something I pose to my students, the question of, if we could, should we? Is it ethical to entrain elephants into being the gestators for these embryos? if you're interested in this, National Geographic has done a few specials on it. The reason woolly mammoths are a possibility is they only went extinct 40,000 years ago, and some of them a little more frequently than that, a little earlier than that. They're relatively closely related to modern elephants, and they were preserved by drying and freezing, which we all know is a really effective way to keep leftovers forever in your freezer. So same thing for woolly mammoth. Some of them even preserved with their stomach contents. So why does this matter? Why does it matter that science is in movies? I've interviewed students before and after the class. At the start of the class, students say that they get none of their science from movies, no science education at all. After the class, they are like, oh yeah, no, I totally did get science from the movies in both sort of obvious and unobvious ways. And you've probably seen studies like this that show that about half of Americans don't know if humans developed from earlier species. About 40% here reported that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. That's problematic. We, of course, have places like the Creation Museum. There's no evidence that this happened. Although this museum is using science to make these exhibits, all of them are animatronic. And then our science, this is the state science standards grades for, I think this is high school, and this is for 2012. California is actually, California and DC are the only states that get A ratings. And so yay, we're doing okay. Whoa, the average grade for the country is about a C-. And I see that on the college end of things when students are coming and not super prepared. So just to end, this is a sort of choose your own adventure bad science movie that is the final assignment in my class, where we've compiled this list over the last 7 or 8 years I've been teaching this class. And the students have to pick 3 from each category and then write a movie that has good science, but is still a bad movie. And then they make movie posters, and they're really, really funny. I couldn't bring any today, but you just have to take my word for it. And some lessons that you learn: nuclear weapons always solve your problems. Dogs never die. You can always fall in love during a natural disaster. And the evil corporate scientist will always be wearing black clothing and smoke cigarettes. That's how you know. So thank you.